Hello, everyone, and welcome to the October 28th episode of the LGS Pod, the Soccer Shorts companion podcast where we highlight topics that affect local grassroots soccer culture here in our hometown of San Diego, as well as across the U.S. and around the world. I'm John Cross, founder of Soccer Shorts, and with me tonight, as always, is our co-host, Dylan Wilson. Dylan, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing well. It was a good weekend of soccer for me, I guess, and San Diego writ large.
Yeah, I had good. I went to the tailgate for the SDFC playoff match. You didn't go to the game, did you?
I didn't go to either, no.
Yeah. I just went to the playoff. It was nice. It's the first time I had been to the tailgate since the opening match. Still haven't been to an actual match. Bunch of people there I hadn't seen since that opening home match of the season. So it was nice to get out and see some people I haven't seen in ages that I used to see all the time back in our loyal and local days. So it was nice. It was nice to see a lot of people and have some of those conversations. So I enjoyed that. The tailgate was nice. They do a great job with their tailgate over there. And maybe one of these days I'll actually make it to a game, as we talked about making it into the Club World Cup. I think that's a hook that might get me there. I might make some plans to see one of those matches. But that was kind of my big soccer news for the week. But I wanted to ask you in terms of soccer, because Oakland Roots have parted ways yet again with a coach.
Oh, did they officially? I didn't realize
they did officially, yes. So when are the Oakland Roots going to finally find a coach they can settle in with?
I don't follow closely enough to know for sure, but my general sense is of like the frustration of Roots fans is that it's an ownership thing. Like the coach can only do so much, right? I thought Failhaber did okay when he came in, but again, I wasn't paying that close of attention, so I don't really know. But yeah, a club with that dedicated a following and ostensibly the resources that they have shouldn't be missing the playoffs. 4 years in a row now? Last time they were in was when they knocked out Loyal, I think. Not for nothing, so.
Yeah, it might be. I'd have to go back and double check that, but they definitely. I thought Failhaber did a better job. He didn't. I don't think. And again, I wasn't following terribly closely, but I get the feeling he didn't have a ton to work with as well. So I think with what he had to work with, it seemed like there was some progress being made. I was a little surprised they didn't keep him. He came in mid-season anyway. It wasn't like he had a full season to work and an off season to work. And that's I don't know if it was a mutual decision or not, but I know that they have parted ways. So might have been somewhat mutual. I don't know.
Well, and I will say too that despite what I think most people would consider a pretty disappointing season, the Roots actually did have the Golden Boot winner in Peter Wilson. And I think, just looking at the stats, he scored most of those goals under Failhaber. So it is kind of interesting that he managed to get the best out of, ostensibly one of their best players, and that wasn't enough. So you do wonder what ownership's cooking now.
Yeah, you do wonder. We'll have to see how that plays out here for them in the off season. There's another story I only want to touch on quickly because we really don't have the bandwidth on our show to cover it, and it's a topic that needs more space, I think, to have some conversations. So maybe we might circle back to this next week, or maybe in a future episode where we can devote a little more resources. But did you see the Elizabeth Eddy posts? She's a player with the I think with Angel City right now, about along the lines of the protecting women and women's rights in the NWSL, since the NWSL doesn't have a policy. Basically, an anti-trans piece is what it is. Did you happen to catch that at all?
I didn't see that.
That has really flared up, and yet once again, the NWSL is coming under fire with between reporters and fans and everything. And the NWSL, and I think they're coming under fire because they've taken kind of a weak stance to this. They had a policy before. At some point, it got changed and lapsed. It's unclear to me exactly how and why it got removed. They had a more inclusive, transparent policy. But this is bringing up the issue yet again, or I would argue every time this conversation comes up about protecting women and women's sports, it is a not so thinly veiled guise for many people to show their hateful, bigoted, behaviors wrapped around something that is on the surface appears or is phrased to be something good. And it is a deeper conversation I'd like for us to have, but we just, on this particular episode, we're kind of packed, and we will definitely circle back to it. So Dylan, we'll probably give you a chance to look into it. I'm sure the last 24 to 48 hours in women's soccer, it has been quite big news. A lot of conversations going on, and it's something that the NWSL is going to have to address better than it has up to this point.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I haven't seen the post, but I don't have too much to say about that post specifically. But to your point about the thinly veiled dog whistle about this is about a women's rights issue, right? I was reading a piece that I kind of unfortunately, I don't remember where I saw it, but I kind of unfortunately found myself agreeing with it. And their point was that the general takeaway was from the social justice kind of awareness uprising of the 2020 era was largely just bad actors using that language to cloak the bad things they're doing more effectively. Not a whole lot of other societal change came out of it. And this is a really good example of it. And now it's getting so thinly veiled because people like the vice president will say things that are horrible, be called on them, and then say, well, it's a joke or whatever. And we're just supposed to take that at face value. And so, to your point, they're getting even more and more thinly veiled. But, and I'm sure this is kind of where you would probably go with it if you were to elaborate it. I'm sure these very same people didn't speak out when that report came out, 2 years ago. I'm sure these very same people protecting women's soccer didn't have such an issue with the systemic harassment and abuse in U.S. women's soccer, but this is where the line is drawn, I guess.
Yeah, there certainly seems to be a different crowd that is protecting women when it comes to trans rights, and were non-existent when we had all the abuse and other things happening. I agree, but yeah, I think it's a conversation we'll move on from now, but we really need to circle back at some point, and maybe it's a good off-season conversation here to bring in some other issues as well. So with that said, I just wanted to kind of touch base, and before I forget, Meg Linehan from The Athletic has a great article about this. So if you go look at it, it just came out today, I believe. Might have been yesterday, but go ahead and find that, and it's a good overview of the piece and the key people right now who are involved, and kind of what's happening at the moment with this particular issue. Okay, let's do a quick preview for tonight. And so we have kind of a big show. It is our 7th episode in our Pro-Rel series. And tonight, we're going to completely solve the Pro-Rel equation in the USL by submitting our plan. Well, my plan. I did this on my own. I don't want to throw Dylan under the bus here. He's doing this with me. But for revamping the entire USL ecosystem. So that's what we're going to tackle in this episode. And that was kind of in response to a video done by Morning Kick Around. So we'll talk about a couple of those things as we get into our main topic. But before, like we always do, let's do a little recap of the week's news. And let's kick it off first with news. There are a whole bunch of things in in world soccer news this week that made me quite happy. Usually I'm very frustrated with some of the things that are going on. And this week, we'll start with, and I'm going to say Italian First Division, because what I've learned, I don't know if there's been an Apple update or something. If I say the name of the Italian First Division, like 3 of my devices kick off, and my assistant starts listening to things because the name sounds too close. So anyway, I'll just say there was an Italian First Division match scheduled to be take place in Perth, Australia, and that is looking less and less likely to happen. So just like the La Liga match not happening in Florida, it looks less likely that this Italian First Division League match is going to take place in Perth. And I can't tell you how much I enjoyed hearing that news.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I wasn't sure if that was gonna, change or not. So that's good, and I hope the players were instrumental in that role, or rather in that instance, like they were in Spain, because it's it's them who's really going to suffer the most. I know we talk about the fans a lot, but like, I'm sorry if you're, first of all, if you're a club in the bottom half, your Palermo's, your Lecce's, your clubs that the average like non-soccer nerd hasn't heard of, you're never going to get like one of those games because you're the big team, right? Like you might get dragged out there as like the Washington Generals to the AC Milan's Globetrotters.
And it might be your home match.
Right, exactly. and maybe more likely, those clubs will never go, so they'll never have to worry about it. But for most of these clubs, like the idea of having to trek down to Australia for this is like absurd, especially because Italian football is not exactly in great financial stead. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how the profit sharing all is going to work out or what, but it just seems very silly, I guess. So I'm glad to see, or I hope that the players had a role in that.
Yeah, I don't know if they did, and I don't know all the details, but I caught a news story for that, and that gave me a nice smile. Along with this story that I haven't seen too much float around through social media, but I caught this and I'm going to be interested in following it. But in Switzerland, the Swiss regulator GESPA, which looks at gambling and other issues, but GESPA filed a criminal complaint against FIFA for its NFT platform FIFA Collect, which the bones of that NFT platform is also what is in their ticketing, like the way they've chosen to do their ticketing for the Club World Cup and then the 2026 Men's World Cup, and especially this idea of putting in money for a chance to get a ticket. Like they're equating it with gambling and violating Swiss law, so it's been referred with a criminal complaint. So we'll see what happens. I don't know if anything will come of it, but again, another news story that gave me a little smirk, and we'll see what happens. Maybe we can start reining in some of these billionaires and billion organizations.
Not holding my breath, but it would be nice.
Yeah. And then I won't say last piece of news, but another good thing purely on the soccer side and also dealing with terrible owners. Sheffield Wednesday had some, on the one hand, very bad news, but I think it's bad news that in the long run is very good news. They have been placed in administration, which means an automatic 12-point deduction. And the last I looked, which I can't remember if it was just before this weekend or just after, I think that put them at -6 points. And they were already going to be likely to be relegated. This pretty much ensures.
League One, correct?
I think they're at the bottom of the championship right now.
Oh, okay.
And they're going to get, either way, relegated.
Sure.
Because isn't Sheffield United
they're in the championship right now? Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're both in the championship because I think they were both sitting near the bottom of the table.
Fair enough.
But anyway, their owner, who supporters and fans have been, at odds with, that's putting it mildly, for a while for the way this owner was running the team. Eventually, it got to the point where fans and supporters organized and they were boycotting, which made the financial situation even worse because people weren't coming to games, which helped force the administration, which again, it's bad news, good news kind of thing. But the
Right.
administration effectively forces the owner out because it's an administration and other people come in to take over to help run and organize things. So not only did they force their owner out, within an hour, I saw a shot online because the owner, I didn't know this till I saw the picture of them removing the seats, but had, like Stadia have the team name or the city name or the nickname, something in there. Well, apparently, a la Ted Lasso, he had his name in the
Sick.
seats. So within an hour of the news, they were removing the white seats that were the white filling out the letters on the blue there in Hillsborough. So they started removing the seats. For this last weekend's game, Hillsborough was packed. The supporters came back. They did kind of a run on the team store, buying merch again, getting all the stuff, getting excited. In this time they've been organizing with their supporters' trust, that they at least had said in one thing that I read that they are in a position to be able to make an offer for the team if someone does not come forward, a viable owner. So the bottom
That'd be
line for all
cool.
this, I think overall it's great news, but it just shows once again that as a group of people, if you can organize and stick together, you have way more power than any individual billionaire owner. And you can take back your club like they have kind of done. Like we'll see what happens if who comes in and buys it. I know Tester was looking at it at one point, and I don't think that would be a good solution. And I'm sure the fans would fight against that. But they have a chance to help set the direction of their club here moving forward. And sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you have to take that hit. In this case, relegation and some other things. But I think in the long run, for Sheffield Wednesday supporters, it's going to be much better off if they have a little more say and a little more control in their club, and they'll be better off even in League One doing that than suffering in the championship with a shit owner.
Well, and I mean, I know we've harped on this before on this podcast, but this is one of the reasons the unified pyramid structure is, in my opinion, superior. Is a club doesn't need to fold because of financial issues. They can go into administration, go down, and maybe that spells the end of the club. Maybe it doesn't, but it's the chance to find yourself again at a different financial level is an opportunity that American clubs, I mean, I'm not going to say they're not afforded necessarily, but it's much more difficult. We've seen it within the USL structure, teams self-relegating, self-promoting, which, fair enough. I guess that's a different interpretation of that. But I think this is a good representation of how, even in relegation, that's actually something in the long run, like you said,
Right.
good for a club. And to confirm, yes, they are bottom of the championship pyramid right now with -6 points.
Yeah. Okay. And to go along with exactly what you said, I was going to talk about a little later when we get to some USL news, because I think it would be a good springboard for our main topic. But we might as well just mention it quickly here now that Texoma from League One has self-relegated back down to USL 2, and that would not be possible without. It's not a perfect structure that USL has, but because USL has teams and multiple leagues, and there's some coordination between those leagues, even if it's not merit-based promotion relegation yet, there is an avenue for teams to do that. Fort Wayne, that's coming back up to League One when they
Cracker
first
Barrel
formed.
FC.
Yeah, right. We can get into that another time, but
Sorry, yeah.
They were originally, I don't remember if they played a year at League One and then went down, or they were going to be League One, and before they started, they opted to go down to League Two. But because they didn't have the stadium in place and they didn't have other things, they could drop back to League Two. And next year, they're going to make their appearance in or back in League One, whichever it is, with a new stadium, new branding, right? And it's going to be, right, there is an avenue for teams to maybe take a step back if they need to and move forward. And that's going to tie into several of the things we're going to talk about here in our main topic in just a few minutes.
Well, and I know I'm sorry, I'm going to give you a second excellent segue into the main topic before you're ready for it. But I do wonder if this kind of fluid pro v pre-professional situation that they have going between League Two and League One, as you said, Texoma, Fort Wayne are great examples of that. First of all, it's sure as fuck better than a club folding. And I understand, an avid listener of this podcast would probably know that we're all Loyal fans, and here, all two of us, and would say, like, well, why didn't Loyal do that? And to be fair, that came up several times in those conversations. And Andrew was pretty clear. He just didn't want to, he viewed that as putting an inferior product on the field. And while I don't, there are a lot of, we don't have time to unpack that, all of the like 3 words of that statement, but like there's a lot to unpack there. But anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But I can empathize with that view, I guess, and I see why he didn't want to do that. I think, truthfully, his eyes were on the MLS, and like whatever we have to say about the MLS, I think that was the right move for that organization, even though it didn't pan out. And oh my God, I'm like reliving all of this now in my head. We're not going to relitigate that. But anyway, the point being, that's better than a club folding, right? And so I do wonder if this fluid situation at the bottom of League One, top of League Two, maybe if, once they have this Pro-Rel structure going, I wonder if League One, as we call it now, the third tier, will be regionalized, hopefully, as we've talked about in recent episodes. And then you can kind of have a fluid situation like we talked about with the the origins of the EFL, right? Like if the bottom team in the league wants to stay up and the top team in League Two doesn't have the resources or stadium or whatever it is to promote, fine, they don't get relegated, they don't get promoted. And that can be the way that works, and it provides that safety net. And anyway, sorry, that was super, I got way off track there. But
and that happens around the world. That is not an uncommon thing.
Exactly. And I think that by having that like pre-professional cushion at the bottom, I mean, obviously no club wants to end up there, but again, it's better than a club folding. I would rather Loyal be playing in League Two than be gone.
Yeah, I agree. I would, I remember some people asking at the time, if they went to League One, would you be there? I said, I'd be there in League Two and be there in the front row of the supporter section. Absolutely.
And truthfully, I said that at the time. And if I'm being like totally honest, at the time when I said that, I didn't know how much I meant it. I wasn't sure. I, now looking back, meant it even more than I could have possibly realized. I miss it so fucking much. Like, even if it like 1/10 of the people came, and when I say the people, I don't mean like the crowd, because 600 people at a League Two game would be a great crowd. I mean like 1/10 of the like core crew that like assembled around this team. I'd be thrilled. And like, I miss it so much every day, honestly.
Yeah, that was kind of the nice thing about being at the tailgate. There were some of those people. There certainly are others that will never set foot still over there. But you're right. I agree with you. I miss it. Is some of the best 4 years sporting experience of my life. And I will never forget. I will cherish it forever. And it's going to be hard to duplicate.
If I ever find something that like feels a third of that feeling, like I'll be pretty goddamn happy. Yeah,
that will be nice. All right, before we digress too much, I'm going to try to get us back on track here. We got a couple other quick stories before we get into some San Diego and lower league news, but they just announced in England, and I can't remember which level it's at, but the longest ever away day in terms of distance in England.
Wait, don't tell me. I want to see if I can guess. So this is like clubs playing in the English Pyramid and in the League Cup. In the
English Pyramid.
In the League Cup, right? Was this in the League Cup?
I don't know which. I think it was a league match.
It was a league match, okay.
But it might be a cup match. I don't know. Looking at the team names, it might be a cup match.
So, I mean, it would have had to have been, I don't know. So are we talking a team from like Cornwall going to a team up in like, the Sunderland upon Weir area?
Yeah, you're pretty close there, like down towards the tip of
Okay,
Land's
nice.
End there, which is Toro City, and
Okay.
then all the way up to Gateshead, which is
Okay.
basically in Newcastle. I mean, I guess
Yeah.
you could
All
say it's
right.
between Newcastle and Sunderland, but it's Newcastle
I'm
is
cheating a
where
little
they're
bit.
in.
I have a map of European soccer
Ah,
clubs. Granted, it's
okay.
about 10 years out of date now. I actually, there are clubs on here that don't exist anymore and clubs that are prominent and do exist that I don't see on here. So, anyway, but yes, I cheated.
Yeah. Well, yes, and it is, and it's 914 miles round trip, not one way, round trip. So really, that's for us, like round trip up to San Francisco and back from San Diego. I mean, to kind of help people wrap their heads in perspective that a trip between San Diego and San Francisco is a record setting away day in England, right? When we start talking about how relatively close in proximity teams are and how dense the pyramid is in teams in a relatively small geographical area. And that's going to come into our conversation here when we talk about USL in a second as well. But that happened this week, and I thought it was good to highlight and just to help people sometimes wrap their brains around, like, you can't just emulate what's in England and just like plop it over to the US
Right.
and make it work. And not so much because of history. I hate when people bring up, oh, there's no history. The history part of it has maybe something to do with it, but I would argue it has relatively very little to do because, again, we covered Japan in one of our episodes, like in episodes 3 and 4 of this Pro-Rel series. And there's a country that is more like us in terms of soccer history that in 35 years created full 3 professional tiers on the men's side. So, like, don't tell me you need a ton of history in order to develop a pyramid. Plus, we did the English pyramid as well. And what we think of in 2025 as the English pyramid, especially from the National League down, was really crafted and created a lot over the last 3 decades in most people's lifetimes here. This is not something that's been set in stone for 100 years. It looked very different 30 years ago and 50 years ago and 75 years ago than it does today.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
anyway, not now I'm going on a tangent.
no, I mean, that's basically what we do here for 90 minutes each week. I think that part of the issue is, and like, I don't know, I'm going to get a little like nebulous big picture here, but I think part of the issue too is that like I feel as though in America we've like fundamentally lost our like societal collective ability to like remember that better things are possible. And I think I'm going to try not to dive into politics here. I think that like part of that, and obviously in a political sense I think that's super obviously true, but I think in a like a societal cultural sense it's less obviously true. But when you start to think about like the way we view our local infrastructure, the way we view like the price of everything, like people just kind of operate in this way that like they're not even trying to make things better, they're just trying to make sure they don't get worse, right? And so I think, and I know that feels like I'm taking like a really a big swing here, but I think there's some truth to it that leaks through into the like cultural aspects of society. And that's true when you look at like our sports. People don't
Yeah.
even try to imagine what could be better, even though every fan of every major sport in America, and I mean, this is probably true in the rest of the world too, but they'll tell you they fucking hate the league that their sport like operates under, right? Any fan of the NFL will tell you they've changed this, that, and this and that about the NFL. Same thing, MLB, NBA, NHL, MLS. Like we know it could be better, but I feel like people have this aversion to like actually seeing that it could be. So I don't know. That was a long way to say people need to be more positive, but I think that's kind of a bigger aspect of it than people might give credit to.
Yeah. Well, looking at the possibility of change and being forward thinking, when we talked about Japan a few episodes ago, we talked about them switching their calendar. They're using the World Cup and the Men's World Cup in 2026 to shift the J League calendar from a spring autumn calendar to a more traditional European autumn to spring calendar. So I don't know if the J League season is completely wrapped up yet. but we should be close to around the time of them wrapping up the season. But they did just announce today or yesterday the schedule for 2026 as they make the shift. And part of that conversation, which is something I think will be interesting to follow for teams here in the US, is that they have announced plans the league has to give money, especially to more northern teams, to help prepare their facilities to be ready for winter matches, like in-ground heating systems, those kinds of things. Now, what I saw the teams in the article that I read was that some of the teams were arguing for more money. It's the equivalent, if I had the conversion right, is about $2.5 million is what each team is getting to help do their infrastructure. And local clubs are saying it's not enough. We need more. But it's going to be interesting to see how much that cost, what kind of investment in infrastructure that they're going to make there, especially when we know MLS has already strongly hinted, basically said without saying it, that they are switching their calendar. It's just a matter of time. So, probably also trying to figure out what to do and maybe trying to look over at Japan to see, okay, can we learn anything from what they did in their transition before we pull the trigger and do our transition? I wouldn't be surprised if that is part of the thinking of doing it maybe a year or two later than they might have otherwise.
Yeah, and I think, interestingly enough, and I actually don't know if this is something we touched on in our, episode about the Japanese league, but I think people always point to Europe for the comparisons because Europe and America are more culturally similar, like just generally speaking. But climatically, Japan is actually a lot more similar to the northern United States than I think a lot of people realize. Like in the top three levels of Japanese play, there's exactly one club on the island of Hokkaido, which is the northern island, right? In all three divisions. I think they're a second tier team in Sapporo, which is like the one big city on Hokkaido. So and it's because it's fucking freezing up there half the year, right? Like I think a lot of people don't realize just how far north Japan is. And so from a, like you said, a prepping for the climate perspective, they're actually a much better allegory than even Northern Europe, even Arctic Circle Europe, because of the North Atlantic jet stream, right? So,
right.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting comparison in that very specific regard as well.
Yeah, and I think that will be a good story to follow. I think it'll be good for USL because I also think at some point USL is going to have to change their calendar. I think everybody is for a whole variety of reasons. I think that's going to happen eventually. So that'll be good to keep an eye on. But let's switch to cup news quickly. I mean, we've been hit with a whole bunch of stuff in some of our other episodes. We've spent, many, many minutes talking about various cups and other things going on, and we have a slight break. We do have round 3 of the qualifying tournament for the 2026 US Open Cup coming up this weekend. We'll give more details on that game that we have locally as we wrap up our show. But there was a round 2 game that did have to be replayed. We mentioned that last episode. It's actually being replayed tonight, I think at 8 o'clock.
Oh.
So you could probably fish around on YouTube if you're with us live and you may want to watch that, or follow up with some highlights or something later in the week if you're catching this. But that's the match against Sharktopus FC and Bellevue Athletic. That Bellevue Athletic won initially, but the referee was a former second team player for Bellevue Athletic. So they replayed the match, which I totally get. And US Soccer was very upfront to say there were no concerns about the match, that there were any problems with the refereeing, and no one complained about that. It just kind of looked bad, and it shouldn't have happened for conflict of interest. But it also, I don't have any problem with them replaying this match because of that. And I think also good to set a standard like, hey, we shouldn't have an official that has a connection with either one of the teams, a direct connection with either one of the teams. But still, I go back to the other one that was protested that we're aware of, where the goal went in, a goal that was counted that went outside of the post and through the giant gap in the side netting. And somehow that one we just ignore because we don't accept video replay evidence.
I said this
I
last
still
time.
come back, and that still bothers me.
I genuinely think it's because it happens so early in the game. They're like, they just don't even know what to do with it. Like, it just, because are they in, well, actually, I guess this maybe will dispel what I'm saying here, but are they're fully replaying that match, not because,
fully replaying
right,
the
but
match.
that's because the match was fully played with the referee who had an obvious conflict of interest. If they were to accept the appeal from the game where it went in the side netting, right? Would they say it happened in the 70th minute? Would they then replay the game from the 70th minute there, or just replay the whole game?
That's a good question. I don't know if it's specifically stated in the rules. I feel like I remember examples, not necessarily in the Open Cup, but of soccer matches continuing from a point. But that's usually, I think, a lot of times a weather delay influenced
Fair
thing.
enough, yeah. Well, see that would, if they picked up from where it happened, that would make sense. But anyway, I have no real evidence for that.
Yeah. All right, so let's switch over to some San Diego news, and I'm putting something quickly in the chat to get ready for our next thing that we're doing. But in terms of San Diego news, the Wave, I don't know if you saw, are going to be in the the World Sevens football tournament. So 2 NWSL teams are going to be represented. It's being played sometime early December, I think like the 3rd through the 5th. The KC Current and the Wave will be in it along with other club teams around the world. I think they've only had one edition of this before, and it was over in Europe. So I think this is the 2nd edition. But the Wave will have an off-season tournament. So I don't know who's going to be there from the Wave since it is off-season. It could be players who don't typically get a lot of time, or maybe some of your younger players who have the energy and want to get out and go play. But I would be surprised if it was a lot of the big name stars that participated. But good for the Wave to participate in this.
Yeah, I had not heard about that tournament, to be honest, but that's good. So there's that. That's like during the off season, ostensibly, quote unquote.
Yeah, it's like December 3rd through 5th. So
okay.
It's done during the off season for. I think when they did the last one, I think they did it in roughly the same time frame, but I think it was during like the winter break for a lot of the European leagues is when they did it, because I don't think they did it over the summer last time. Anyway, what's our other bit of, I'll call it San Diego news, but this is more directed at San Diego MLS fans. 615 Soccer, which is out of Nashville, they, along with a whole bunch of other groups, I think Backheeled and Hudson River Blue and a whole bunch of more local independent outlets, have kind of pulled together to do an MLS survey. So if anybody's, for those watching live, it's in the chat, or maybe watch the YouTube on a replay. We put the link in the chat there for that MLS survey. So if you are an MLS fan, go ahead and fill that out, because even though we're not super high on MLS, I know we have people who listen to us that still are big followers of SDFC. So survey there's the link. We'll put it in the description and show notes as well, so people can access that and give your thoughts, not directly to MLS. This is a bunch of independent outlets. So I haven't seen the questions of the survey, but probably a very different phrasing of questions and a take and what they're trying to get from an independent soccer outlet as opposed to an MLS generated survey. So I'd encourage you to fill it out if you are an MLS fan. Okay, and in USL, we already talked about Texoma, but the other news is we're into playoffs now on the men's side. So for Championship and League One, got a bunch of pretty exciting weekend last weekend for games, and had some shuffling around of positions. But now we have full slate of playoff games on both those leagues heading into this weekend. So check your FootMob app. USL show usually records Tuesday, or an episode on Tuesday. So I'm sure they're going to have a big preview if you're interested in checking out that podcast. But if you want to find out what's going on with playoff soccer, that is the place to go. And I really just kind of used a bunch of USL at the end because allow us a pivot here to our main topic, right, which is kind of reimagining the USL ecosystem in terms of promotion relegation. So last week, we gave you a homework assignment. So, and it was to go watch. Let me see if I can pull it up here on our screen, which was this video here, the huge questions facing USL ahead of promotion and relegation. And it was put together by the Morning Kick Around crew. And they released it, I don't know, October 20th, I guess 20th publicly, but they released it on their private channels for their members probably a few days before that. But it has generated a lot of conversation and comments, I know, on their Discord server, which I am not a member at this time. And also just on their YouTube page, a whole bunch of comments with a lot of people. They have questions they want answered. And part of it is because we don't know what the plan is from USL. So it's natural that people have questions and they want to get them answered. So I thought they did generally a very good job with this video of presenting some questions and getting people to think about certain topics. And they kind of finished the whole thing off with, well, what are your ideas and what's your plan? And of course, me being the person who likes to, I tinker and toy with the stuff all the time, doodle and stuff in my head. And I decided, all right, I will take it on. And what I'm going to present here is not, it's not something that I just threw together in a week because I'm the type of person who likes to plan things out. It's like a puzzle for me. It's relaxing. I like to do it in free time just to, figure out puzzles and solve it. So this is really more of a culmination of probably 10 years of thinking on this, but more inspiration to kind of cull everything together in maybe a more coherent form after watching the video and kind of being prompted and seeing the conversations and saying, all right, I'm going to take my stab at it. So before we get into any of that, Dylan, any comments or questions? First of all, did you do your homework and watch the video?
I did, yes. I mean,
Oh, good.
Yeah, they presented some interesting questions. So yeah, looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah, and we'll go through those questions quickly. For the sake of time, for what we have, I'm not going to answer the questions directly. I'm going to let the plan I present answer those questions. But we can certainly talk about it, and hopefully there's some time at the end for us to kind of discuss some of the potential merits or changes or anything else. So on this video, for anybody, here's my recommendation. We had the link on the last episode. We will get the link in the description. So if you're watching this not live with us and you're listening to it later or watching it later, I would recommend stopping this video and using the link that I believe is already in the show notes, in the early show notes we prep when we get ready to do the live stream, and watch the video if you haven't seen it yet, to give you a frame of reference for what we're going to talk about. But also for those who are live, we're just going to run through the questions quickly of what they are, so you can start thinking about them as well, and then I guess we'll try to answer them. So before we get started with the questions, Dylan, did you have anything you want to add or jump in with?
Yeah, not so much in relation to the video necessarily, but I think I've seen this sentiment expressed from a lot of people. I think it feels as though there is some impending change to the PLS, or I think more likely an impending exception carve out to the PLS that is going to make a lot more obvious how USL is going to go about this. And I don't know what the holdup is, or if it's even a holdup, or if they're just waiting intentionally. But my thought is that USL is waiting for whatever that is in partnership with US Soccer to become known so that they can then release their plans. Because again, I think if they release their plans, it would probably show what changes are coming, because I think those two things are probably tied together. Because I just don't see the whole like metro area thing, for example. Like I just don't see that not being a giant roadblock to this Pro-Rel idea. So that's kind of my thought on the relative lack of a plan thus far, but that's just my speculation.
Right. And that is ultimately the problem. We don't
Mm-hmm.
know, right? US Soccer hasn't put anything out. USL hasn't put anything out. I can't imagine there's not conversations happening. There have to be. There's USL people who sit on the board over at US Soccer. So, the conversations have to be going on. Just because we don't know about them doesn't mean there isn't progress being made, but maybe there's not. And that's the problem. We don't know. So I totally get why a video like this works on a lot of levels for
Yeah.
people. It brings up some questions people already have, like, yeah, I have that question too, and maybe some questions that they didn't really think about. So, their first question is, when is it going to happen? And again, knowing when it's going to happen helps for the planning. And when you leave it up in the air, or you wonder, is it going to be pushed back, or what's going to happen? Certainly, that's a question everybody has that I'll answer a little bit in my plan, right? If I was king of USL and I could implement stuff, this is what I would do. But you know, I think what date they're actually doing it, whether it's 27, 28, 29, whatever, is less important than that there is an actual start date, which we don't have right now. We just don't know what it is. But there is a defined start date and a plan for how this is actually moving forward. How many teams are going to be in each division? And to me, this is a question. That's the second big question they asked. I think this is putting the cart before the horse. And
Agreed.
I go back to our episode we did about Japan. And, when I look at Japan, when I look at Canada, when I look at Australia, some of the countries that we've covered in this Pro-Rel series, everybody kind of wrote a report. They put something together and it was out there public that helped shaped the way they were going to move forward. Now, Japan did 100-year vision, right? They really looked at where they could be in 100 years, very Japan-like. Canada and Australia looked more like, okay, what could we start doing right now? And I really think, and that's part of like my plan, I just nicknamed Vision 2050, right, for USL. But, trying to look like where you want to be, because if you know where you want to go, you can figure out how best to get there. And I don't think we do that enough in just this country for a lot of things. We
And that was
fly
kind
by
of
the
my
seat
earlier
of our
point,
pants
right?
a lot of ways.
We don't imagine. It's not even that we don't build big things anymore. We don't even imagine big things anymore.
Yeah. So again, another question I think that putting the cart before the horse is how many teams will go up and down. And that's, it's important to know, but if you look at the development of soccer pyramids over the years, over the 150 years of history we have with soccer, that is constantly in flux and changing until other things get settled. And then that usually gets locked in. So that's again, a little bit of a cart before the horse, but I get why people want to know. I want to know if I'm in the league and there are X number of teams in the league and two go down. Well, now I know we didn't do so well before and I could be in jeopardy, right? Those are things that people want to know. So again,
Yeah. And the most, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think a lot of people won't like this, but the most honest answer is that if this is really going to work, the truth is that number might change a handful of times in the first 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
Because that's what it takes to make this work. That's what's happened everywhere else in the world.
It has. And you look at Japan that I just promoted, that in 35 years, they have this robust 3-tiered professional structure with, 20 teams, I think is where they're at right now in each league for the J1, J2, J3. And yet depending when you look, one team's getting promoted and one team relegated, or one and a half, right? So you have the one automatic and then the playoff between the team from, like they do in Germany, right? The team from the league above and the team from the league below, or you have two and a half, or you have two, or you have three before they finally settle in because you've got all the right things top and bottom. Your upper league and your lower league are really solidified, and now you can really solidify the promotion relegation piece. And that all takes time. So again, I understand the question. Just like this next one, what exactly would be the process for clubs that win promotion but don't meet the standards? Worldwide, that already exists. You don't get promoted.
Yep.
Like that's what happens. You're there on merit, but it's not just merit. We see this everywhere. You also have to meet whatever the standards are of the next league. They're usually league standards, not, we have our
Right.
USL or
Right.
US Soccer's PLS. But there's always a standard, and you have to meet all the standards to be promoted, not just merit. We're just so used to seeing the top level leagues playing where everything has been sorted out, and whatever teams are down below have already met all the requirements they need to move up because they've either been there before and got relegated, whatever it is. But if you look deeper into any pyramid down there, there are always these issues, and people self-regulate sometimes, like we said, or even if they've met everything, like, you know what, this is not the right time for us to go up. And then whoever was going to be relegated because of that before stays up. It just,
Or you can
that's
have the
just
second
how
top
it works.
team go up, like if they're prepared, and yeah. Sorry.
Right. I mean, there's if you were going to have two automatics, then yeah, your number one couldn't. So maybe your number two still goes up. And usually in most leagues, they won't take your number. If there weren't anybody else in line for those promotions, they're not going to automatically promote like the third place team because the first place team didn't
And my
go.
point is more just that, like, it can be what we want it to be or what we need it to be. Like, there's no
Right.
defined way that this has to be.
Yeah, there is no defined way. And one of the other questions we've already talked about is USL working with US Soccer, right, on both the professional league and the standards. Another one, I think, again, cart before the horse is, are there going to be parachute payments? And, not every league does parachute payments because it's not necessary. But when you have a huge disparity between one league and another in terms of finances, then that might need to be something to be done. I'm not sure that, maybe it should be part of a conversation in long-term planning. I'm not sure first year, second year, that's really a conversation yet. It might be. But again, I think these are some things that we're used to seeing and hearing about because of our bias of other leagues that we're familiar with that do promotion relegation. So we just wonder how they would work here. And not that we shouldn't consider them, but sometimes I think like there's an order here that we should be considering some things. Another question is territorial rights and Pro-Rel. I mean, personally, again, if I was king of USL, I would like to see territorial rights scrapped. They may not get scrapped right away, but my gut feeling is they will eventually.
If the Pro-Rel structure is to have long-term success, territorial rights will have to be scrapped at some point. But like you said, people need to remember that this is not going to be like, this is a 25-year project if we're going with John's plan, and like you can't just expect it to all to happen at once.
Right. And then one of the ones is, will new expansion clubs have to enter at the bottom?
I mean, yeah,
now,
probably.
I get what people are saying, but I think it depends what you mean by the bottom.
And what you mean by expansion club.
Right. And you even see, even fairly recently in England, like when we had the rebirth of Wimbledon, right? And you had Milton Keynes, right? They move up to Milton Keynes, and then you had kind of the rebirth of the new Wimbledon. They did not start at the lowest level. Like they were able, because of some organization and other things they met, to be able to jump in a bit higher up the pyramid than, say, a team like Dorking Wanderers, right? So yeah, it depends what you mean at the bottom and bottom and what your structures are. So again, I think, I think what all of us don't want is you have a defined league at the top and you have a league underneath and you're already doing promotion relegation. Someone can't just buy their way into the top.
Right.
And that I 100% agree with, right? You can't buy yourself into the, like, we've already established the number of teams that are going to be in this league. Below that, we already have a league and it's already established and we're doing already promotion relegation. No, you don't get to bypass everybody and jump into the top. Like that defeats the whole purpose of having, your promotion relegation.
Right.
But
I think it would be, I mean, like you said, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but I think realistically it would be something like the highest level you can buy in at is like the lowest the highest non-professional level or the lowest professional level or something.
right.
Like that. Right.
And where there is kind of room for growth, like that league hasn't completely filled out yet. Because that's what naturally happens also is league starts small, whatever's below, and then it fills up and it grows till it reaches whatever its defined limit is going to be. So yeah, maybe a team can jump in there rather than in a league below, but certainly not up in the top for me. Again, asking how many PLS waivers that USL is expecting from US Soccer. I think that there's an internal bias there that those professional league standards are set in stone right now. And I would argue that they're not. And I'll talk about it in a second, like what I think USL should do for the PLS. But I think, as Dylan alluded to, that there could be some changes or an alternate PLS for USL because they're doing a completely different type of structure than all the other leagues. And, I'll jump into it now. I think specifically USL should push for that. They need their own. If USL or US Soccer is going to mandate professional league standards, I think USL needs to make the argument. If again I were king of USL, I would make the argument then we need different standards because we're doing a different system than everybody else, and we need to make that work for what we're trying to do.
Yeah,
and that's again another kind of conversation, but I think again we're jumping. I think a lot of these questions, they're not bad questions. I think they're just jumping just a little far ahead, and they're jumping far ahead because there's no plan, right? There's no plan. Like, how many have applied for D1 now? What are the deadlines? I think people are interested. Like, I want to know. I want to start planning for that year that it happens. So I want to know what's going to happen with that. And then their final question from the video, besides what's your plan, is what happens to League Two? And I think that is the most interesting question of the video, and maybe not the way they intended so much, but also because their video was produced and came out right around the same time that the US Soccer white paper came out that we covered last week for revamping college soccer, and what college soccer and USL2 are kind of going to go hand in hand in that they're going to influence each other.
Right.
I really think USL needs to take a proactive approach to give a space for college teams to enter if they want. There are going to be a group of people who want to try to preserve college as it's always been, and that ship has sailed. It's not going to be the way it's always been. It's going to be something new. It may still be college soccer, and it may be its own separate entity outside of everybody else's ecosystem. That might still exist. I don't think it will. But if they go through a year-long college system, what does that do to 95% of the League Two in USL that specifically relies on those college players and giving them a place to play so they get more year-round experience? They won't need that anymore. Those kind of plans are directly in conflict with each other. So again, USL could either make a plan that embraces and tries to welcome in some kind of partnership with colleges, or fight against it at this pre-professional level. So I don't know. That, to me, that is the most interesting piece that has so many moving parts. It's really hard to see how that's going to play out at the moment.
Yeah, I hadn't even really considered that.
So those are the big questions they asked. And already looking at the time, I don't think we're going to get through everything that I have tonight. So we may have to kind of cover this on finish it up on the next episode. But we'll see how quickly we get through these things. So as I was putting this together, I'll say this week, but really, like I said, I think about this shit all the time. I doodle, I write things down, and that's the thing. I write things down and keep them, and I do digital whiteboards, and then 3 months later, I'll come back to it and keep tweaking it, and then leave it and come back. So again, this is not something that I just threw together in a week, but also things I've been thinking about for a while, but then tried to put it into a more coherent plan, over this last week since that video came out. So like we mentioned before, as Japan did their 100-year vision, here's my 2050 vision for USL. And before we get into that part, I think it's really important if you're going to create a plan, in this case and I would call it a soccer ecosystem as opposed to just league or a series of leagues. And this is all going to be under the USL umbrella. You have to know where you want to be in order to get there instead of fumbling your way through. I think, especially in soccer, we do so much fumbling our way through things. And this is why we don't get nice, coherent kind of structure and leagues, because well, I think there's a lot of reasons for that, not because people don't want to. I think sometimes there's a lot of hurdles in the way. But I think in this moment in time, there's fewer hurdles in the way of USL being able to do something like this. So here are top considerations that I took in trying to put this together. One, I tried my hardest to keep my biases in check, right? We all are comfortable with different pyramid structures. Most of us very familiar, at least with the very upper levels of what happens in England, but even some other places might be familiar with the idea of promotion relegation. And it's easy to just take one example and use that as like the basis for all your thinking. So one of the things I've really enjoyed is we've done this series and we've looked at different countries, and the timing didn't work out because this video and with everything else going on with USL, it just felt like a natural time to talk about this. But I really would have also liked to do an episode on Brazil, large country that does regional and national footprints of leagues. Really would have liked to have done that. We'll circle back to Brazil at some time later, but also, as part of this conversation. So keeping the biases in check, understanding the parameters that we're working with in this country. It's huge, and I'm going to go over some of those. And then, don't reinvent the wheel. So part of keeping your biases in check is sometimes you have to throw out the things you already know and are comfortable with a promotion relegation system. But then at the same time, looking at the broad picture of 150 years of soccer culture, also don't throw out things that work, right? We have lots of examples of things that work. So follow the things that work, even though it may not be how we normally do things in US, or in this case, as I'm going to demonstrate here, might go against some of the current professional league standards. I think you really need to, you got to kind of think outside of the box. So that was my approach. So here, one of the realities that I won't really get into it too much because we've already talked about it is the PLS, right? That's a reality we have with US soccer. I think that is negotiable in some way. I hope USL is working on that part of it. Also, as Dylan said, same thing. I hope that is being, that those conversations are happening. But it is something, at least at the moment, you have to take into consideration. I'm going to say two things that sound different. I think you have to take into consideration there are going to be some standards. But I also think as you're trying to design your big vision, you don't necessarily hold these exact standards in place. And I'll explain what I mean as we go through the plan here, either today or tomorrow or next week. And then for me, what's your purpose of having a pyramid? And I think if you ask people in this country, there's a whole variety of reasons. My reason, which dominates the plan that I was trying to put together, is the whole reason you have the pyramid is to make the best league at the top. And the way you do that is by having an entire ecosystem of teams that are connected together in a pyramid structure through promotion and relegation. But ultimately, it's to make your top of your pyramid as strong as can be. And I think from a business standpoint and those kinds of things of having a strong league or having a top tier league or a division 1 league or whatever you want to call it, your fastest and best way to get there is to have a good pyramid structure underneath it that keeps putting constant pressure up from the bottom, forcing the teams up top to improve, to stay there, or they're going to get overtaken by someone else who's doing the job better. So that was kind of my thinking for that point. And in terms of don't reinvent the wheel, in terms of pyramids and consistencies we see across soccer pyramids, these are some of the things I mean. And this is where I think, here's where my plan is probably going to rub people the wrong way in a lot of ways here, because it's going to kind of scrap a lot of things that USL has been trying to do. But if we look historically at soccer pyramids, it starts with whatever your top league is. That's where it starts. It starts with a single league. And then those teams that are outside of that league, they form a league underneath. In most cases, because it's not the United States and it's, governed by FAs and there's some better structure, but a league gets formed underneath the top division. And then once that kind of gets established, you start getting some promotion relegation that happens between the two leagues. And then once those are kind of established, the other teams that have started to be formed over the years or are getting better, they start putting pressure and form a league underneath, or maybe a couple of regional leagues, depending on the geography of your country. So, they start at the top. I think USL's biggest problem right now in trying to move forward with this is they have a decent, what is ultimately going to be the second division, the championship, 24 teams. They have a League One that they've been trying to build up, which now next year looking like it's going to be at 20 teams with Texoma self-relegating. But they have no first division. If you take the teams you have and you bump them up to a first division, you are depleting your base underneath it. Right. So that I think is a fundamental flaw with what the USL is trying to do. So I'll talk about how I solve that, for lack of a better word, and when we get to the plan piece. And then the typical thing we always see with pyramids is they go down deep, and at some point they also start to broaden out wide. They get more regionalized and more localized as it goes down the pyramid. And it depends where you look. In different countries, we look at, England, and you've got your top 5 steps, tiers, however you want to look at that, but your top 5 are all national, right? They all have the exact same footprint. It's more like a column than it is a pyramid. But then you start regionalizing and then splitting again and getting smaller and smaller groups as you work down the pyramid. And other places regionalized by their third tier, right? Depending on country, geography, size, population density, all those things. But ultimately, pyramids, as they get deep, at some point also start to become wider and have parallel league structures rather than everything being a national footprint all the way down. And then that gets ultimately into our country. I think you cannot move forward with any kind of plan unless you really accept the reality of the size of our country, because we are more akin to the size of Europe itself, especially with our contiguous 48 states. But we also have Alaska and Hawaii. I mean, we can't leave them out if we really want to make a true U.S. ecosystem here. But we're big. We just talked about that away trip in England and being the equivalent of San Diego to San Francisco, and that just broke the record for the longest away day, right? So we have a size of a country that it makes it a challenge to do promotion relegation and to figure out what kind of footprints you're going to have around the country. Our geography, and which plays into our climate as well are also things like you talked about Japan being very different north to south, just like we are north to south or interior of the country. And we have areas that get super hot, areas that get super cold, areas that get super wet, areas that are affected by storms routinely, right? So like all those things have to be taken into consideration, and our population density. You know, we talked about this with Australia in the Australia episode is we have roughly 80% of our population lives east of the Mississippi River, only 20% west of the Mississippi River. And the majority of that lives in California. So we have places where we have lots of population density, and we could probably have lots of teams. And we have areas out west where there are huge swaths of open land that start to make travel a little more challenging. So all those things have to be taken into consideration as you're trying to figure out what this ecosystem is going to look like. And then I think you need to identify some footprints. Like, are you going to have a national footprint? Are there going to be regional footprints? Like we already have regional footprints in US soccer. We identify 4 regions: the East, the Midwest, the South, and the West. We consistently have those through youth soccer and through adult soccer. So we've already identified some key regions like that. We could do different ones. We could keep those same ones, but you know, and we tend to do that in a lot of our professional leagues. If you look at some of our pre-professional leagues, they are divided in sometimes 4 broad categories, and within that they're divided into smaller leagues, which are mostly interstate leagues. You know, you got a few teams, and especially in smaller states that are close together, or maybe they're all organized in one state. Like our local UPSL is a bunch of San Diego teams, a couple of Orange County teams, and a couple of Riverside County teams, right? So the footprint really is going to, you know, it doesn't have to be the same and equal everywhere, but it's going to depend on geography and climate and population density for how these work out. We have state associations. California is so big, it's divided into 2 state associations, Cal South and Cal North. And then within those state associations, there are districts. But all these give us like anchors we can use to start creating the footprints for different structures of the pyramid. Okay, and the last thing, and then I'm going to turn it over to you for a second for comments, is I think what a lot of leagues have filled in the gap to do is this pre-professional in the US. Because right now for the US soccer, we kind of identify a professional level. I mean, we clearly identify professional level, and then we drop down to amateur. And that's a big jump. If a club really wants to, hey, we want to get out of amateur status and we want to make it into the professional level, I think as part of the pyramid structure, you really need to define what your pre-professional level is. And for USL, they already have that. It's USL 2. But as we talked about before, USL 2 is really a summer league. It's not really truly imitating what it would be like for someone to move up to a professional level, you know. So those are the parameters. I think you need to look at all of those and able to put a plan together. I'm gonna pause there for a second, turn it over to you for any comments and stuff before we give the big overview of the plan, and then we'll probably leave it there. And next episode we can get into some of the details and talk about the merits of it.
Well, I think it's a lot more complex than a lot of people realize, and because of, if we were starting from scratch, it might be more simple, but we're not, right? Like, as you said, we have a lot of realities we have to contend with. So I don't know. Honestly, there's a lot more nitty gritty questions I'm now mulling over just from what you've said here. But I think that there's gonna be some people aren't going to be happy. Like, you can't make everybody happy, right? You have to break some eggs to make an omelet, as they say. So I don't know. I think sometimes it's going to look like a step backwards and ends up being a few steps forwards, and people need to like go into this understanding that.
Yeah, and then so I'm going to give the big overview of my plan, and I know probably 80% of the people will bristle at it at first blush, but I hope they mull it over, at least for some of the ideas here, and I get it, especially depending if you've given this a lot of thought or not. And look, if I was king of USL, yes, I think this would be a good route to go. I think it would bring us to where we want to be faster than most other things I've seen out there. But I'm one guy, right? I'm just throwing this out there. This is not like the definitive plan. And man, if you asked me a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, this would have been different. And I'm sure a year from now, this is going to be tweaked and different, right? As new information and things come up. So right now, this would be the plan that I would put forward. If USL asked me, come consult with us, this is what I'd say. First and foremost, as we saw people mention this in the Project 2010 document, the Q report and those things, and other documents through US Soccer, especially from people who've come over for Europe to help consult with US Soccer. Our country is huge, and I think we need to think of our country more like Europe rather than like a country, rather than like England or Germany or Italy and try to duplicate what they have. Our country is big, so treat it more like a confederation rather than one single country. And this is where it's going to rub people the wrong way. So just like UEFA, if we look at it, there is no pyramid in UEFA. Each country has its own pyramid. UEFA brings people together for continental tournaments, but each country does their own pyramid, and England does it vastly different than, say, Denmark. And then you take a country like Sweden that runs it on an entirely different calendar, right? But they're still tied together across the continental footprint by the UEFA tournaments. I think the US needs to approach it this way. And frankly, the first time that I saw this, I bristled at it too. And it was, I think, back with the work of Daniel Workman and Chris Kessel. And they're kind of splitting this up in the vision. And this is, I'd say, a bit of a tweak on that idea. But I think we need to not have one, we'll say it here, I do not think there should be one single unified pyramid in the United States. I think there should be multiple independent, regionalized pyramids. And I would start with 4. I would do the 4 that we already use through US Soccer. Region 1 is the East, Region 2 is the Midwest, Region 3 is the South, Region 4 is the West. You can give them fancy names, whatever it is, but make them independent, regionalized pyramids, as opposed to one national unified pyramid. And I would argue to do this because, one, at the very surface level, it helps meet some of your PLS requirements, right? In terms of making sure you have a national footprint. Because I think very quickly, if USL just tries to go with a national league that's small, of maybe 12 teams, a national footprint, and you start implementing promotion relegation, you could find yourself in a de facto regionalized league within a couple of years.
Right.
All your teams could be in the South or the East or the Midwest or the West. Or some regions could have zero teams in them. I think if you have independent pyramids, you kind of help fend that off. You are guaranteed to have top teams in the West, top teams in the Midwest, top teams in the East, top teams in the South. And you have these then independent pyramids. And you play with, just like England plays their league within England, you play your league within your region, and you do a national equivalent of a Champions League tournament to tie things together nationally. And there could be more than one. Europe does 3, right? We do Champions League, Europa League, and Conference League. Like, depending on your teams and how it plays out, you could do different things to help tie all those regional pyramids together into a national footprint of a tournament. But this also helps account for geography. It helps account for climate. It helps account for population density as we start looking to do these pyramids. And we don't let, by default, because we're such a large country, and all of a sudden, I don't know, money flows into the Eastern corridor and teams, and all of a sudden that becomes a hot spot and the West dies down, and we now have nothing. Like we're not connected anywhere to any of it. And I think that's a very realistic possibility if you don't account for that in the very beginning. So to me, I'd have 4 at least, but I'd start with that 4 independent soccer pyramids. Again, you'll have teams across the country. Sorry, skimming through my notes here. And you have your national tournament to tie things together. But each pyramid will handle their structure independently of each other. Like in the East, maybe you go down 12 steps, and in the West, maybe we go down 5 steps. I don't know, because we have such big travel, and there might be things where we just can't quite do it the same way. Or maybe in California, we go down 12 steps, but the rest of the West doesn't, right? So I think allowing the regions to more independently control the levels, although you still have to have a defined professional level, you have to have a defined pre-professional level, and you have to have a defined amateur level. You still have those structures in there, and you still have how you're going to sort out your promotion and relegation. But maybe the South grows a little faster, so they start off with more tiers than some of the other areas. It also allows you to, I think everybody should be on the fall spring calendar, but it also allows you to tweak maybe your start and end times and your winter break a little bit differently for your particular region. Okay, that's the big overview. What I probably won't do right away, we'll have to look at our time here, but the next 2 big things for this are, what does a regional pyramid actually look like it's say in 2050 fully fleshed out? And then the last step would be, how do you start? If that's your vision and you want to be there in 2050, then how do you get from where we are now and start transitioning to that over the next few years? So I'm going to leave it like there for a second. Dylan, I'll let you give some feedback, because I know we've had conversations about this, and I would say 90% of the people I talk to feel very strongly that there should be one national footprint league at the top division. We could change and regionalize down below. But I think if you, again, I really think if you look at our country and you look at how we are, population density, climate, everything else, I don't think one single pyramid works for the United States.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely would be a tough sell, and if I'm honest, I don't think you would be able to get enough people on board to do that. But I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think too that the idea of having regional, pyramids, and then at the end of each year or whenever, the winners of each pyramid play a Champions League type tournament, or then the wild cards play a Europa League type tournament or whatever. That also kind of helps. That's kind of like a nice melding of the European model and the US model too, because that satiates the need for a playoff, right? So I don't know. I think it makes a lot of sense. I just think emotionally it's going to be a very, very tough sell.
Wow. You think that's going to be a tough sell? Well, wait till I explain to you how the regional pyramids work,
Oh boy.
the tournaments work, and then the implementation. But I think with our time, since we're just about at 90 minutes here, I don't want to go, because I'm looking at this and probably got another 30 minutes to cover things. We'll leave it there, and then next week we'll pick up with part 2 of this, and then I will go into detail of what I think. And I would argue that even though each pyramid is independent, I would argue trying to have a similar structure, as similar as possible within each region. But I'll break it down like for the West in a regional pyramid, what it would look like at the professional, pre-professional, and amateur levels. And then the tournaments, like what are we talking about in terms of trophies and everything else, and how that could possibly work. And then we'll look at if we really want to try to do this, what would we need to do kind of first step. And again, I think if you have that all in mind and you have a plan, and that's the biggest thing. I don't care if USL does this plan. I like this plan. I think it's a good plan. But I think the most important thing is USL has to have a long-term vision plan, whatever it is. And then they need to sell it, at least make it public to everyone, even if they pick it apart or whatever. But it needs to be out there so people can talk about it. And then, once people know and understand, like, this is the direction, then everybody, like, it's the same shared space publicly. So everybody knows, fans know, journalists know, everybody knows the direction we're trying to head and how possibly to get there and what they need to do in order to get their team ready to move up to the next level. Or, hey, I'm going to self-relegate. But you need to have whatever it is. You need to have that vision of where you want to be. So we'll flesh out that vision next time.
Yeah, sounds good. It's funny how much everything you just said about establishing your vision and coordinating to build that up could also be applied to like everything politics on the left right now. But anyway, again, not going to go there.
Yeah, that is so true. Okay, Dylan, before we go, just a reminder to the MLS fans out there to, if you're interested, do the MLS survey that 615 Soccer has put out there in collaboration with all the other local independent groups that got together to make the survey. Make your voice heard there as a supporter. And then Dylan, besides us going to if you're still planning on going, but besides us going to the round 3 qualifying match this coming weekend, what are your plans?
Well, that was pretty much it.
Yeah. Same with me.
Saturday, right?
Yes. So the round 3 qualifying tournament match will be at Mission Bay High School. Kickoff is at 8 p.m. It's on Saturday, November 1st. SD Enter versus City SC. I actually am most likely going to help with the live stream broadcast. So I've been talking with Tony and Chiva. Nice. We can see if they need any extra hands as well. But
that 8 p.m. start time's not ideal, but I'm going to do my best to be there.
Okay. I know you said that might be a little bit of a conflict for you.
We'll see.
I will definitely be out there helping at the very least with the live stream. And if not helping with the live stream, being a fan and supporting US Open Cup soccer in our local area.
Yes.
Other than that, I'm probably going to try to catch what games I can in USL and League One and, probably SDFC as well. Just tune in with what's going on in terms of playoff matches and so forth. And we're in that playoff season. So that, and I don't know, are we in a Champions League week? I keep losing track every once in a while.
This is Domestic Cup week.
So. Okay. Yeah, so I'm sure there's going to be some things that pop up on Folk Mob or something else, and I will poke my head in there and keep my tuned in to some of the games and some of the results out there. But the Open Cup qualifier is what I'm most looking forward to this weekend.
Yeah, I think that'll be a lot of fun. I'm going to do my best to make it. I did want to say too, I did make an effort, though not a very strong one, but I made an effort to watch the San Diego FC game. And I guess I knew this, but I forgot. And I understand that Apple and MLS got to make their nut or whatever, but it is diabolical that these playoff games are only on Apple TV or whatever. It's I just they're not on any form of broadcast anything, and it's just ridiculous. I don't know. So
that's the way things are going.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That's how it's going to be moving forward.
And I hate it.
I have less a problem with it being on Apple TV. I think the stupidest thing was
the best of 3 is stupid too, but that's a whole
other thing. Yeah, the best of 3 is dumb as well. But I think it was a huge fail that they made the MLS stuff behind and well, not even an additional paywall, but its own special paywall
Yeah.
of broadcast.
Yeah.
You and I both do things like Paramount Plus, and I have ESPN Plus, and like there's a subscription for those, and I get everything.
Mhm.
I do Apple Plus TV like as the subscription service. So the playoffs are now available to me as an Apple TV Plus subscriber. So, you know, that's what it should have been in the first place, which is, I don't know. It used to be like $6 a month. I don't know if it still is, but $6 a month gets you all the stuff on Apple TV Plus in addition to Major League Soccer. That's how it should have been from first place, just like my Paramount Plus subscription and everything else. I can watch everything on there, not just one thing. I think that was their biggest mistake. If it would have just been on Apple TV Plus, a $6 subscription, I don't think that would have
That's
been
fair.
an issue for most people.
I mean, and I know this argument's been made several times over. I just think if you're like playoffs are when you're going to catch the casuals, right? Not like casuals are not going to pay. You have to have it on like a broadcast something, at least one fucking game, like one game, and they don't do it. So I don't. That's anyway. That's my rant.
Yeah. It's I think it has taken MLS out of the conversation quite a bit nationally.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, it's a tough choice, but more and more things are going that direction. Yeah, we'll see. That again, that's a whole other conversation. So maybe we'll leave it there. Okay, well, that wrapped up another episode of the LGS pod for us. If you have a question or comment about tonight's show, especially if you have a question or comment about anything I presented in terms of my 2050 USL plan, love it, hate it. Yeah, please leave us your comments. You can do so here on our YouTube channel and tell us what you think. Understand, though, we're also not done. We'll finish it up next week with the rest to get into some more of the finer details of how things could look. But leave us a comment on our YouTube channel. Contact us via Blue Sky at soccershorts@bigpinedigital.com. Or if you're listening on your podcast app, you can send us a text link using the Send Us a Text link. That's at the very top of the episode description. But always, if you are available on Tuesday evenings at 6 p.m. is when we usually do our live stream, come join us in the chat and participate in the conversation. And with that, Dylan, any final comments before we head on out?
No, not particular. I guess go SDFC, close it out. Don't take the Sua game 3 and put us in the typical San Diego spot of nervousness.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see if that happens. Either way, that's it for this episode of Local Grassroots Stories. Thanks for joining us, and we will see everyone again next week. And of course, I don't have the music queued up to actually take us out of here. Okay, here we go. We'll see everyone next week.